He had the ticket. He had the seat. Yet a polite smile pushed him to the back of the plane. In first class, a flute of champagne sparkled. In row 18, a phone screen glowed. Beat. When a quiet CEO pressed a single button, the cabin's hush became a storm that would follow flight AG417 all the way to Eastport. What decides who belongs in a seat you paid for? Policy, perception, or the person who dares to say no? When a captain steps out, when a junior attendant chooses conscience, when a journalist lifts a phone, does an airline protect its image or its people? What happens when silence becomes strategy? When dignity walks through a wall of cameras and does not blink? You are about to meet Dominic Hale, calm, grounded, unshakable. You will hear the hum of engines, the click of a seatbelt, the small words that cut the deepest, and the decision that forces a system to look in the mirror. Beat. If you believe respect is not a luxury, like this video, share it with someone who needs to see it. Subscribe to the channel and let us step into the cabin together. The air inside Pacifica International Airport shimmered with the quiet hum of early morning travel. Rolling suitcases clicked along polished tile floors. The overhead announcements blended with the low buzz of conversation. Somewhere in the distance, a coffee grinder roared to life. It was the soundtrack of departures, layered and familiar. Flight AG401 to Eastport International was boarding at Gate 14, a gleaming glass portal to a Boeing 787 Dreamliner. The sleek aircraft waited beyond the jet bridge, its curved nose and massive engines promising speed and comfort. Inside the first-class cabin, flight attendants adjusted pillows and smoothed blankets, preparing for the select few who would fill the wide leather seats. At the boarding lane marked first class, a small group of passengers clustered in line. The first to step forward was Edward Langston. At 55, Edward was the kind of man who made entrances like they were part of a stage play. His silver hair was carefully styled. A deep navy suit hugged his frame. A silk pocket square peeked from his breast pocket in a precise triangle. He carried no bags. Someone else had taken care of that. "Mr. Langston," Samantha Brooks said, her voice carrying the smooth warmth of a well-trained flight attendant greeting a VIP. "We're so pleased to have you on board again. Welcome back." She gestured toward the jet bridge with an open palm, and another attendant stepped forward, offering a flute of champagne. Edward accepted it with a slow smile, eyes scanning the cabin beyond, as if already claiming it. "Always a pleasure," he replied, his voice low and self-assured. He sipped the champagne before stepping onto the aircraft, moving at a pace that invited admiration. Behind him, a different presence approached the gate. Dominic Hale, CEO of Apex Global Airways, walked with the quiet confidence of someone who understood the value of stillness. At 44, he wore a tailored charcoal suit, its lines clean but understated. His shoes were polished but softened by use, the kind of leather that told stories of miles traveled. A simple black carry-on rolled behind him, the handle smooth from years of flights. He had boarded countless planes in his life, but there was always something about stepping into an airport that felt like crossing into another kind of city, one without permanent residents, only people in motion. Today, his destination wasn't just Eastport. It was a boardroom full of negotiations that could redefine a major aerospace contract. The stakes were high, but his demeanor stayed steady. Dominic handed his boarding pass to Samantha with a polite nod. "Morning, Flight AG417 to Eastport." Samantha glanced down at the pass. "Seat 2A. Her eyes flicked back up to his face. For a moment, There was a pause just long enough for the warmth in her smile to cool a few degrees. "Sir," she began, keeping her voice professional, "I believe there may be an issue here. This seat is reserved for our priority passengers." Dominic kept his gaze even. "It's the seat listed on my ticket." She tilted the boarding pass slightly as though inspecting it for hidden errors. Sometimes the system accidentally upgrades a booking. "I'll just need to verify before you can take your seat." A man in the line behind Dominic shifted impatiently, but Samantha's attention didn't waver from him. "For now. Could you wait in the main cabin while we sort this out?" There was no scene, no raised voice. Dominic simply studied her expression, saw the polite wall she had built, and recognized it for what it was. He had seen that wall before, a barrier made not of policy, but of perception. His choice now was the same one he'd faced in countless boardrooms and negotiations: push forward and be labeled combative, or step back and play the longer game. He stepped back. "Of course," he said softly, rolling his carry-on toward the aisle that led to economy. In row 18, Dominic slid into a narrow seat beside the window. He placed his bag overhead, then sat with his hands folded loosely in his lap. Out the corner of his eye, he saw passengers file into first class, where Edward Langston was already reclined with his champagne, laughing with another traveler as though the cabin were his private club. 2 rows ahead, a young woman with a camera phone angled discreetly toward the aisle. Taylor Wynn, a freelance journalist with an instinct for moments that mattered, had noticed the subtle exchange at the gate. She didn't know who Dominic was, but she knew what she had seen: a man with a first-class ticket quietly redirected without cause. Taylor pressed record. Dominic felt the gentle vibration of the aircraft as more passengers boarded. The chatter rose and fell like waves. Beside him, a businessman scrolled through emails, oblivious to the small shift in the plane's atmosphere. Dominic's mind, however, was far from idle. Why now? Why here? He asked himself. You've built this company from the ground up. You've sat at the tables that decide the future of this industry. And yet, someone still thinks you don't belong in seat 2A. He looked toward the curtain that separated him from first class. The fabric swayed slightly with the movement of the crew. The line between the 2 cabins was thin, a few feet of carpet, but it might as well have been a border between worlds. He reached for his phone. From the home screen, he tapped an icon that wasn't visible to just anyone. It opened to a secure login. A soft prompt appeared: Initiate Protocol. Orion Dominic's thumb hovered over the confirmation button. Protocol Orion was an internal override, a system designed for moments when the integrity of Apex Global Airways was at risk. It wasn't meant for personal grievances. It was meant for breaches of principle. He pressed confirm. In a glass-walled operations center at Apex headquarters, hundreds of miles away, a red notification blinked onto a monitor. Miles Chen, a ground operations analyst, leaned forward. His coffee cooled beside him as his eyes scanned the screen. The sender's name made him sit up straighter. Dominic Hale, CEO, Protocol Orion. Miles opened the attached data feed. It was live CCTV from the boarding area, time-stamped and clear. He watched the moment Samantha took the boarding pass, saw her smile fade, saw Dominic redirected toward economy. It wasn't a glitch. It was a choice. Miles exhaled slowly. What the hell just happened? On board. Dominic locked his phone and leaned back against the seat. His face was calm, but a quiet current of resolve ran beneath it. The game had changed. The curtain to first class swayed again. Somewhere in the distance, Edward Langston's laughter rolled across the cabin. Beat. This flight had not yet left the ground, but for Apex Global Airways, turbulence was already building. The boarding line thinned as the final passenger stepped onto flight AG421. The hum of the jet bridge shifted to the soft murmur of cabin announcements and the metallic click of overhead bins. Dominic remained seated in row 18, his posture calm, his mind sharpened to a point. From his vantage, he could see Samantha moving down the aisle toward the forward galley. She walked with the composed efficiency of someone who had done this thousands of times. But there was a flicker in her eyes when they passed over him, a brief tightening, as if she had not expected him to comply so quietly. Across the aisle, Taylor Wynn angled her phone just enough to capture Dominic in frame, her fingers moving lightly to adjust focus. She was careful, almost invisible in her movements. The first clip was already uploading, a caption typed without overthinking. First class ticket. Sent to economy. No explanation. She did not include his name because she did not know it yet. What she knew was that people would recognize the moment for what it was. Dominic glanced at the phone in his hand. Protocol Orion had been activated. The wheels were already turning far from this cabin. He could feel it like a shift in the weather. But here, inside the narrow fuselage of the 787, the air still felt heavy. Samantha's voice came over the PA system, bright and polished. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to welcome you aboard Flight AG417 to Eastport International. Please make sure your seatbelts are fastened." The familiar rhythm of the announcement washed over the passengers, but Dominic heard the subtle undertone of performance. It was a script, one that masked the choices she had made minutes earlier. In first class, Edward Langston lifted his champagne flute as though toasting the cabin itself. He was leaning toward another passenger, recounting a story that involved yachts, a foreign coastline, and an expense account. His voice carried easily over the subdued hum. Dominic's eyes returned to the curtain between cabins. It was more than fabric. It was the visible line of separation, the threshold she had denied him. He took a slow breath, willing himself to stay in the calm center of the storm. At Apex headquarters, Miles Chen sat forward in his chair. He had isolated the footage from the boarding cameras, clipped it to a 30-second segment, and encrypted it for internal review. His fingers danced across the keyboard, pulling up Dominic's passenger file, verifying his seat assignment. Everything was correct. The boarding pass matched the manifest. There was no overbooking, no system error. His headset crackled. "Ops, this is Captain Alvarez. We have a Protocol Orion flag on AG417. What are you seeing?" Miles' voice was steady but clipped. "Sir, I've reviewed the boarding footage. The passenger is Mr. Hale. He was directed out of his assigned first-class seat without cause. I'm forwarding the clip to your secure tablet now." There was a pause on the other end. Then the captain's voice came back. Lower, more deliberate. "Understood. Keep the feed live." Back on the aircraft. Taylor's phone buzzed in her palm. The first clip had started gaining traction. A handful of comments appeared beneath it. "What happened here? That man better be getting an apology. Classic. Same story. Different day." She bit her lip, watching the numbers rise. Taylor had covered protests, corporate exposés, and quiet acts of courage that never made the evening news. This felt like one of those moments where the small, unguarded truth could spark something much larger. The last few passengers stowed their bags. The cabin crew moved through the aisles, checking belts, closing bins. Dominic watched as Leah Ortiz, the junior flight attendant, approached his row. She smiled softly, a flash of warmth in a cabin that felt otherwise chilled. "Anything I can get you before we depart, sir?" she asked. He shook his head. "I'm fine. Thank you." Her eyes lingered for a second, as though she wanted to say more. Then she moved on. Dominic recognized the look. It was the look of someone who had witnessed more than they could comment on. Over the intercom, Samantha's voice returned. "Cabin crew, prepare doors for departure." The words rang with the confidence of a routine proceeding exactly as planned. But this departure would not be routine. Near the front of the aircraft, Captain Marcus Alvarez glanced at the tablet mounted to the bulkhead in the cockpit. The video from Miles was crystal clear. He saw the moment Samantha's smile dimmed, saw her tilt the boarding pass, saw Dominic redirected. He replayed it twice. The decision settled in his mind like a weight. He toggled the cabin call button. "Samantha, can you step into the galley for a moment?" When she arrived, he gestured toward the jump seat, his tone measured. "I just reviewed a boarding incident with passenger in seat 2A. Can you explain why he was moved?" Her brows lifted slightly. "Oh, that? There was a mix-up in the system. Those things happen." "There was no mix-up in the system," Alvarez said, his voice still even. "I've already had it verified." Samantha hesitated, then drew in a slow breath. "Look, Captain, sometimes we get last-minute changes. I didn't want to delay boarding." Alvarez held her gaze. "We're not delaying boarding. We're addressing an error in judgment. Seat 2A is his seat. I'm going to move him there now." She blinked. "Mid-boarding." "Immediately," he replied, "in economy." Dominic saw the captain step through the curtain, his uniform crisp, his expression unreadable. Passengers instinctively leaned back to make room. When Alvarez reached row 18, he extended a hand. "Mr. Hale," he said quietly, "I've reviewed what happened. Let's get you to your seat." Dominic rose without a word. The captain's presence was enough to part the aisle ahead. As they approached first class, Taylor's camera tracked their progress. She didn't need to caption this second video. The image spoke for itself. Edward Langston looked up as Dominic entered the cabin, his expression shifting from mild annoyance to something sharper. He glanced at Samantha, then back at Dominic. No one spoke. Dominic placed his carry-on in the overhead above seat 2A, then sat down with the same unhurried composure he had carried all morning. From behind her phone, Taylor captured the final frame, the man who had been sent to economy now seated in first class, the captain returning to the cockpit, and the senior flight attendant turning away with a strained smile. By the time the aircraft pushed back from the gate, both of Taylor's clips had been posted. One showed the quiet removal, the other, the captain's intervention. Together, they began to tell a story the internet would not ignore. Dominic leaned back against the leather headrest, eyes on the clouds forming in the distance. The curtain to first class swayed gently as the engine spooled up. Somewhere far from the cabin, the turbulence had already begun. Beat. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the aircraft taxied toward the runway. Outside, the early sunlight spilled across the tarmac, flashing over the smooth curve of the wing. From his seat in 2A, Dominic Hale's face was calm, but his thoughts moved like deep water beneath a still surface. He opened his phone again, shielding the screen from casual glances. The secure app for Apex Global Airways Executive Network was already running in the background. The protocol Orient confirmation pulsed faintly at the top, a reminder that the first step had already been taken. What came next would depend on the people who saw that signal and understood what it meant. Miles Chen was one of those people. In the operations center, he sat surrounded by glowing monitors and the soft hiss of air conditioning. The floor-to-ceiling glass showed the Pacifica skyline in the distance, but his focus was locked on the incident feed. The boarding footage was still looping on his center screen. Each time, he noted the small details, the shift in Samantha's expression, the way Dominic hesitated before stepping back, the lack of any check-in system alert. There was no operational reason for what had happened. That left only human reason. Miles switched to the live cabin feed. Dominic sat quietly in 2A now, the captain having restored his seat. The tension in the frame was subtle but unmistakable. Samantha moved briskly along the aisle, avoiding Dominic's row entirely. Leah Ortiz served drinks to passengers in business class, her glance flicking briefly toward first, then back down to her tray. Miles keyed into the encrypted communications line. HQ to Captain Alvarez. Status check. Alvarez's voice came through steady. Passenger is in assigned seat. Departure in 2 minutes. Keep monitoring. In the economy cabin. Taylor Wynn refreshed her social feed. Both videos were climbing fast. Dozens of retweets had turned into hundreds. Comments flooded in from strangers who had never met Dominic but recognized the shape of the story. Taylor felt the familiar tingle in her gut, the sense that something was about to cross from a small injustice into a public reckoning. The engines roared, and the aircraft began its takeoff roll. Dominic's hands rested loosely on the armrests, eyes on the bright strip of sky through the window. As the plane lifted, the cabin tilted and the horizon shifted. For a moment, there was nothing but the rumble of the climb and the hiss of air conditioning at full power. Once they leveled off, the seatbelt sign chimed off. Leah stepped through the curtain into first class, carrying a tray with small bottles of water and folded menus. She paused at Dominic's seat, her voice quiet enough not to carry. "Mr. Hale," she said, "I just wanted to say, I saw what happened. I'm sorry." He met her eyes. There was no need for her to apologize for someone else's choice, but he recognized the risk she took even saying this much. "Thank you," he replied simply. Samantha appeared from the galley and Leah moved away quickly. The senior attendant stopped at Edward Langston's seat, leaning in to pour another splash of champagne. Edward chuckled at something she whispered and raised his glass. Dominic reached into the side pocket of his carry-on and withdrew a slim, black tablet. He unlocked it with a fingerprint and a soft chime sounded. A prompt filled the screen. Upload incident report. He tapped yes. The device began sending the live sequence of events, the boarding video, the seating chart, the cabin camera snapshots to a secure cloud accessible only to Apex Integrity Oversight Team. Miles saw the file appear on his dashboard. He tagged it with a high-priority marker and routed it to the CEO's private folder. Then he paused, realizing what that meant. Dominic had not just triggered a protocol. He was building a documented case in real time. Every keystroke Miles made from this moment would become part of the official record. At 35,000 feet, the cabin hummed with the steady rhythm of flight. Dominic watched a small cloud formation drift below. Inside, his thoughts replayed the morning in slow motion. He had walked into the airport with a plan for the day that had nothing to do with public confrontation. Yet here he was, mid-air, the center of an unfolding story. He thought of the young employees at Apex who looked to him as proof that leadership could look like them. He thought of the investors who measured his every move in terms of risk and return. And he thought of the countless passengers, not CEOs, not executives who experienced similar moments without the means to challenge them. In the row behind, Taylor angled her phone and took a still photo. Dominic in profile, gazing out the window, light catching the edge of his suit. She added it to the thread she had started, captioning it, simply "Stillness is not surrender." Within minutes, her post was retweeted by a civil rights attorney in Eastport, then a business columnist in Chicago, then a pilots union rep in Dallas. The thread's reach began to accelerate beyond her usual audience. Samantha returned to the galley, her posture stiff. She tapped the intercom to the cockpit. "Captain, first-class service complete. All secure up here." Alvarez's reply was brief. "Copy. We'll be discussing this further." She hesitated, then set the handset down. Leah glanced at her from across the galley, but said nothing. Miles received another ping on his console, a direct message from Apex VP of Compliance. Who initiated Orion Miles typed back a single line, "Dominic Hale, age 417. The typing indicator on the VP's end blinked, then stopped. No further questions came. Miles knew that meant the matter had escalated beyond his level. Dominic closed his tablet and leaned back, letting the gentle vibration of the aircraft settle into his bones. He could feel the weight of eyes on him, some curious, some uneasy, and at least one lens capturing every moment. He was not looking for a spectacle, but he understood the value of letting events play out in view of others. Transparency was a sharper tool than any quiet settlement could be, and in his position, every action was a message to the crew, to the passengers, to the world watching from the ground. Taylor's latest post pinged his phone. He glanced at the screen, saw his own image reflected back at him with the words she had written. He didn't reply, but the corner of his mouth lifted just enough to register as approval. In the galley. Leah poured coffee for a passenger in business class, her thoughts drifting back to what she had witnessed. She had worked under Samantha for 2 years. She had learned the routines, the policies, the customer service language, but she had also learned what lines could be crossed without official record. Today had shown her the other side of that. She glanced toward first class again. Dominic sat exactly as before, hands folded, gaze steady, the kind of presence that didn't fade from memory. In the cockpit, Captain Alvarez reviewed the incident summary on his tablet one more time. The decision settled in his mind. This would not be handled quietly when they landed. Not this time. Beat. At 35,000 feet, with clouds stretching to the horizon, the quiet activation of a single protocol had begun to ripple outward. What started at the gate in Pacifica was now unfolding in the air, carried on invisible currents toward something much larger. By the time flight AG-17 had been in the air for less than an hour, the quiet spark Dominic Hale had set at the gate had begun to catch. The internet was already in motion. In seat 22C. Taylor Wynn refreshed her feed and felt her pulse quicken. Her 2 short clips were no longer just climbing, they were surging. Mentions were piling in, the comment threads multiplying. Hashtags had begun to sprout, linking her post to larger conversations about travel bias and discrimination in public spaces. A flight attendant's cart rattled down the aisle in economy. Taylor accepted a glass of ginger ale without looking away from her phone. The screen glowed with notifications: a retweet from a verified journalist, a reply from a well-known travel blogger, even a direct message from a news producer asking if she would be willing to share the original footage. Far away at Apex Global Airways headquarters, the operations floor hummed with a very different kind of energy. Miles Chen's screen was alive with red priority markers. He had just finished routing the incident package to the compliance team when a new request came through. The CEO's Orion activation had triggered a top-level monitoring sequence that alerted not just compliance, but also the legal department, corporate communications, and the captain in command of the flight. Miles clicked into the live cabin feed. Dominic was still in 2A, leaning slightly forward as if deep in thought. Samantha Brooks was serving another passenger 2 rows ahead, her face composed but lacking the relaxed confidence she'd displayed earlier. Leah Ortiz passed behind her with a tray of coffee cups, her movements brisk but careful. The phone at Miles' station rang, the extension flashing the captain's secure line. He picked it up immediately. "Chen here. This is Alvarez," the captain said, his voice low and direct. "I've seen enough to know this needs to be addressed before we land. Keep the internal comms open." "Understood," Miles replied. "In first class." Edward Langston shifted in his seat, glancing toward Dominic with a flicker of irritation. The captain's earlier escort had disrupted his sense of order. Edward had grown used to being the most important passenger in any cabin. Now, sitting 2 seats away from a man he didn't know, whose presence had drawn the captain from the cockpit, he felt a prickle of unease. Dominic noticed the glance but let it pass. He had no interest in confrontations that served no purpose. His mind was on the sequence of steps already unfolding at headquarters, the protocols designed to pull hidden problems into the light. He had helped design those systems not for moments when everything went wrong at once, but for when small acts carried larger meanings. Today was one of those days. At the rear of the aircraft, Leah paused in the galley to refill a carafe of hot water. She could feel the change in the atmosphere as surely as she could feel the shift in air pressure when the plane climbed. It wasn't just the usual rhythm of a long-haul flight. Something was building. The senior crew whispered in hushed tones. The captain's brief visit to the cabin had not gone unnoticed. She thought back to the look on Dominic's face when she offered him water. Calm, yes. But there had been something else, a kind of watchfulness, like someone who had learned to read every small detail in a room before deciding how to act. Leah had seen passengers get angry, even shout, when they were told to move seats. This was different. His silence had weight. In economy, Taylor's notifications showed a spike she hadn't anticipated. A city council member from Eastport had retweeted her video with the comment, "If this is how we treat people in plain view, imagine what happens when no one's watching." The words carried their own momentum, pulling more eyes to the thread. Taylor typed a quick update. Update passenger now in rightful seat after captain intervened mid-boarding. Senior crew has not addressed the incident with him publicly. Still in the air. She hit post and slid the phone into her lap as the attendant offered her a snack. Up front. Samantha's hand hesitated for the briefest second as she reached for a passenger's empty glass. She could feel the captain's presence in the cockpit like a shadow. Protocol Orion wasn't common knowledge among crew, but she knew enough to understand that something had been triggered beyond her control. She avoided looking at Dominic's seat. Dominic, meanwhile, unlocked his phone again. A discreet notification had appeared: Orion, status escalation phase. He knew what that meant. The incident had now reached the level where senior leadership would be pulled from other duties to respond in real time. That included the board chair and the head of Apex Diversity and Ethics Division. The wheels were turning faster now. In the cockpit, Captain Alvarez adjusted the autopilot settings and took a slow breath. He had seen many kinds of passenger disputes over his career. Some were misunderstandings, others the result of rigid policies applied without discretion. But this was different. The footage and the passenger's identity had placed it in a category where inaction was not an option. He sent a brief message through the crew network: delay ground departure clearance on arrival. Review pending. It was a small line of text, but it would alert gate staff and security to be ready. Miles received the same alert on his dashboard. He added a note: arrival team prepare secure conference space at Eastport. FAA liaison may be notified. His hands moved quickly. The process almost automatic now. What wasn't automatic was the quiet satisfaction he felt knowing that the system was working exactly as intended. In seat 2A. Dominic sipped water and looked out at the cloudscape. Below them, the continent stretched in muted shades of brown and green, rivers glinting in the morning light. He thought about the meetings waiting for him in Eastport, the deals to be negotiated, the strategies to be shaped. Yet he knew those could wait if it meant addressing something larger, something that spoke to the culture not just of Apex Global Airways, but of the industry itself. The captain's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we are cruising at 37,000 feet. We'll be over the Rockies shortly. Sit back and enjoy the flight. His tone was as steady as ever, but Dominic caught the faint undercurrent, the calm before the next shift. Taylor leaned back in her seat, a small smile playing at the edge of her lips as she saw the engagement on her post continue to grow. She wasn't sure how this story would end, but she knew it had already left the confines of the plane. Whatever happened upon landing, the world outside would be watching. Leah stepped into the first-class galley, pausing to glance at Dominic before turning to check the service list. She didn't say anything, but the thought lingered in her mind that some flights leave you with more than just a destination. Some leave you with a story you'll never forget. The cabin lights glowed softly, passengers settling into the rhythm of the flight. But under that surface calm, the chain reaction was well underway. Every message sent, every clip posted, every quiet decision made in a control room hundreds of miles away, all of it was building toward the moment when Flight AG417 would touch down in Eastport. And when it did, nothing about the day would be routine. Beat. The steady hum of the engines filled the cabin like white noise, a sound that usually softened the edges of any tension. But today, it seemed to sharpen them. Every movement in first class carried a weight, a quiet calculation. Dominic Hale sat upright in 2A, his expression as unreadable as the horizon beyond the glass. Captain Marcus Alvarez had been silent for most of the climb, letting the automated systems handle the long stretch over the Rockies. But the incident replayed in his mind with each passing minute. In all his years of command, he had learned that problems ignored at altitude rarely dissolved on descent. They hardened. He toggled the cabin interphone. "Samantha, when you have a moment, join me in the forward galley." A pause crackled through the line before her voice replied, "Understood. Captain, in the aisle." Samantha smoothed her uniform and walked forward, her heels clicking softly against the carpet. When she stepped into the galley, the captain was already there, arms folded, his gaze steady. "Close the curtain," he said quietly. She obeyed, the thick fabric falling between them and the rest of the cabin. "Explain what happened at boarding," Alvarez said, not unkindly, but with a firmness that left no room for deflection. Samantha hesitated, the faint scent of brewing coffee hanging between them. There was a last-minute reassignment. These things happen. Marcus. The system. He held up a hand. "I've reviewed the manifest, the boarding footage, and the internal logs. There was no reassignment, no operational cause." Her mouth tightened. "Sometimes it's better to avoid a scene. We had a VIP request, and it seemed simpler to move Mr. Hale quietly. That quiet move triggered a top-tier protocol." Alvarez said, "Do you understand what that means?" She exhaled sharply. "I understand that he's the CEO, and I understand that maybe this is about optics now, But in the moment? In the moment. Alvarez interrupted. You made a choice that cannot be justified by procedure. And now we have a live incident with documentation streaming to headquarters. Samantha's eyes flicked toward the curtain, as if she could feel Dominic's presence through it. So what happens now? What happens now, Alvarez said, is that we finish this flight professionally. When we land, there will be an official review, and you should be prepared for questions that go beyond this one decision. Her jaw clenched, but she nodded. Understood. As she turned to leave, Alvarez added, Samantha, the uniform comes with responsibility, not privilege. Remember that. She didn't reply, just slipped back into the cabin with a mask of composure that didn't quite reach her eyes. From his seat, Dominic had not heard the words, but he had seen the exchange. The way she emerged from the galley, posture a touch stiffer, her eyes avoiding his row, told him more than any overheard conversation could. Leah Ortiz passed through first class, collecting empty glasses. When she reached Dominic, she spoke just above a whisper. Captain had words with her. I think she knows. Dominic offered a small nod. Thank you. Leah, in economy. Taylor Wynn adjusted her seat and scrolled through her feed again. The videos had reached a major news network's account. She read the headline attached to the repost: passenger removed from first class without cause. Captain intervenes mid-boarding. The comments were a storm of outrage, solidarity, and speculation. She knew this was no longer a niche social media story. She began drafting a third post. We are still in the air. Crew appears divided. The passenger in question remains calm. No public acknowledgement from senior staff. She hesitated, then added, atmosphere tense but contained, waiting to see how this ends. At Apex headquarters, Miles Chen watched the engagement metrics on an internal dashboard. The system wasn't just tracking the social media spread, it was correlating it with Apex brand sentiment analysis in real time. The numbers were shifting, fast enough to draw attention in the executive wing. He received a direct ping from the VP of Compliance Legal, wants a hold on all public statements until CEO debrief. Keep live monitoring. Miles replied copy. Flight stable. Captain engaged with senior FA. In first class. Edward Langston cleared his throat and leaned toward Dominic. Quite the spectacle you've stirred up. Dominic turned his head slightly, meeting Edward's gaze without a hint of heat. I didn't stir anything. I sat in the seat I was assigned. Edward gave a short, dry laugh. The world's full of people who think they're owed a certain place. Dominic let the words hang in the air before answering. Sometimes the place you're owed is exactly the one you paid for. Sometimes it's the place you were told you belong. And sometimes the fight is about making sure the next person doesn't have to argue for it. Edward's smirk faltered, but he said nothing more. Leah returned with a tray of small appetizers. She offered them first to Dominic, then to Edward, then moved on without lingering. But Dominic caught the almost imperceptible squeeze of her fingers on the tray's handle, a silent acknowledgement. Over the intercom, Captain Alvarez's voice carried through the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be passing over the Mississippi in about 20 minutes. For those seated on the right side of the aircraft, you'll have a clear view. Our arrival into Eastport is on schedule. His tone was even, but Dominic recognized the subtle cues meant for the crew. Keep service smooth. Avoid unnecessary interaction. Maintain control. Taylor tucked her phone away for a moment, looking out the window at the bright expanse of sky. She had been on dozens of flights, witnessed small dramas and petty disputes, but there was something different about this one. The calm in 2A was not the calm of someone ignoring a problem. It was the calm of someone waiting for the right moment to act. Miles sent another update to the executive thread ETA 2 Hall City. Recommend ground security meet aircraft. Prepare press response. In the boardroom at Apex, the chairwoman herself had been briefed. She leaned back in her chair, considering the implications. A CEO targeted with discriminatory treatment on his own airline was not just a personnel issue. It was a public trust issue. And in the age of instant communication, the court of public opinion was already in session. Back on the aircraft, Dominic closed his eyes for a moment, centering himself. He could feel the shifting currents, the captain's intervention, the social media escalation, the quiet awareness among the crew. But he knew the decisive moment had yet to come. That moment would arrive after touchdown, when every hidden part of this story would step into the light. For now, the engines hummed, the clouds drifted, and the confrontation that had begun at altitude continued in silence. Beat. The cabin had settled into that strange rhythm unique to long flights, where hours seemed to stretch and compress at once. A passenger in business class flipped through a magazine without really reading it. In economy, a toddler giggled at an animated movie while his mother dozed lightly. And in first class, Dominic Hale sat still enough to appear detached, yet every sense was tuned to the subtle shifts in the air around him. Far below, the ground was a patchwork of farmland and small towns. From this height, the details were invisible, but Dominic knew there were people on the ground moving with precision because of what had happened in this cabin. In Apex Global Airways headquarters, Miles Chen kept one eye on the incident dashboard and another on the secure communications channel that linked him directly to the VP of Compliance, the legal team, and Captain Alvarez's cockpit feed. Each update was marked with a timestamp and a green or red status icon. Most remained green. A few had shifted to amber. At 10:47 Eastport time, a new message appeared: FAA liaison, aware, monitoring upon arrival. Miles leaned back for a moment, letting the weight of that settle. The Federal Aviation Administration did not get involved in every passenger dispute. Their attention here meant the matter had already been elevated beyond routine airline protocol. In the cockpit, Captain Alvarez received the same notification. He glanced at his first officer, a quiet nod passing between them. It was rare to have a mid-flight situation where outside agencies were already preparing to greet them at the gate. Back in the cabin, Samantha Brooks moved down the aisle in first class with a pot of coffee. Her smile was automatic, her words clipped but polite. Yet there was an undercurrent to her movements, a tightness in her shoulders that Dominic noticed as she poured a cup for Edward Langston. Edward, sensing the tension, but not understanding its scope, leaned toward her. "This whole thing will blow over once we land. Just make sure it stays quiet." Her eyes flickered, a trace of doubt in them. "It's not up to me anymore," she said softly before moving on. Dominic's phone buzzed faintly in his palm. He turned the screen toward himself, shielding it from view. A secure message from the chairwoman herself scrolled into place. "Mr. Hale, status received. We will have full reception and review team on arrival. Proceed as you deem fit." He closed the message without typing a reply. The chairwoman's wording was deliberate. She was reminding him that the next steps were his to control, and that the company would align behind whatever course he chose. It was a subtle but unmistakable acknowledgement that this incident was not just about one flight. In economy, Taylor Wynn took another look at her feed. The engagement had reached levels she'd only seen during major breaking news. National journalists had started following her account. One had tagged the airline's official handle, demanding a public explanation. Others speculated about whether the passenger in question was indeed the CEO. She typed quickly. Ground sources confirm FAA will monitor arrival of flight AG417. Unclear if incident will result in immediate action. Still in the air. Passenger calm. Crew split in tone. Leah Ortiz passed through the economy cabin carrying a tray of drinks, her eyes scanning the rows automatically. She paused when she saw Taylor, recognizing her from the boarding area. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, and in that moment Leah understood who was feeding the story beyond the aircraft walls. She did not intervene. By the time Leah returned to first class, the scent of warmed bread and fresh fruit was drifting from the galley. She stopped at Dominic's row. "Would you like anything before the next service round?" "Just water for now," he said. As she poured it, she hesitated. "Sir, whatever happens when we land, I want you to know not everyone up here agrees with what happened earlier." He met her gaze with quiet gratitude. "I know. Thank you for saying it." Edward shifted uncomfortably in his seat, pretending to be absorbed in a report on his tablet. The presence of loyalty toward Dominic unsettled him in a way he couldn't name. Miles received another ping from the FAA liaison security protocol to initiate upon taxi. Media presence confirmed at gate. He typed the details into the operations log, already picturing the controlled chaos that awaited. Gate agents, security officers, compliance staff, and now reporters would all converge in a tight window between landing and deboarding, in the cockpit. Alvarez adjusted the flight plan slightly to account for a line of weather building near Eastport. It would not delay them significantly, but it added another layer to his mental calculations. He checked the fuel status, confirmed their ETA, and then keyed the interphone again. "Leah, join me in the galley when you have a moment," he said. When she arrived, he kept his voice low. "You've been in proximity to Mr. Hale more than the others since boarding. Anything I need to be aware of?" She considered her words carefully. "He's calm, watchful, not trying to escalate, but he knows exactly what's happening." The captain nodded. "Good. Keep it that way. We're under a microscope now." Dominic had returned to gazing out the window, but his mind was far from the clouds outside. He thought about the junior staff at Apex, about the trust they placed in leadership to protect them from small humiliations that could grow into larger patterns. He thought about his parents, who had taught him that dignity was not given by others, but maintained within oneself, even under pressure. And he thought about what message would be sent today, not only to the crew of Flight AG417, but to every passenger and employee watching from the sidelines. Taylor's phone vibrated again. This time it was a direct message from a television anchor she admired. "If you can go on record when you land, we'd like to have you live tonight." Her pulse quickened. She typed back, "We'll see what happens on arrival. It's moving fast here." The seatbelt sign chimed on as the captain's voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin our initial descent in about an hour. Weather in Eastport is partly cloudy. Temperature 74 degrees. Please remain seated until the sign is turned off." The words were routine, but Dominic could feel the slight shift in tone. The descent was not just a change in altitude. It was the narrowing of the path toward whatever awaited them on the ground. Leah cleared the last of the service items, her steps quickening slightly. Samantha stood near the forward galley, arms crossed, watching the cabin with an expression Dominic could not quite read. In headquarters, Miles' final pre-arrival update was already drafted ETA 1ER05, FIA, compliance, Legal. Media confirmed at gate. CEO informed. He hovered over the send button, then clicked. On flight AG4 Hassington, the sky outside deepened in color, the ground drawing slowly closer. Every mile closed the distance between a quiet injustice at the gate and the public reckoning it had become. Dominic took a slow breath, steadying himself. The next hour would define not just the resolution of this incident, but the tone of every conversation about Apex Global Airways for months, maybe years to come. And as the first faint shimmer of the Eastport coastline appeared in the distance, he knew the most critical moment was still ahead. The seatbelt sign chimed again as the captain's voice came over the speakers, this time with less of the casual cadence passengers expected. Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our initial descent into Eastport. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and your belongings are secure. The cabin began its slow tilt forward, a gentle reminder that gravity was taking back control. Dominic Hale felt the subtle shift press him against the seat. Outside, the clouds thickened into a textured quilt, casting soft shadows across the landscape below. To anyone watching, Dominic appeared calm, his hands resting loosely on his knees. But inside, his thoughts moved with precise purpose. He could almost see the choreography unfolding on the ground security team's positioning at the arrival gate. Compliance officers reviewing boarding footage, media vans parking outside Terminal B. In the cockpit, Captain Marcus Alvarez made small adjustments to the throttles, his eyes moving between the instruments and the view ahead. His first officer, Riley Chang, glanced at him. "You think they'll make this a public spectacle?" Alvarez's jaw tightened. "It's already a public spectacle. Our job is to land safely and keep the cabin stable until the doors open. In first class." Samantha Brooks walked the aisle with clipped efficiency, checking that bags were stowed and trays locked. When she reached Dominic's row, she paused for the briefest second. "We'll be on the ground shortly. Mr. Hale," she said, her tone polite but lacking warmth. Dominic looked up at her, his expression unreadable. "I am aware." Her gaze held his for a moment before she moved on, but not before Leah Ortiz caught the exchange. Leah had been working nonstop since the first sign of trouble, and she knew that moments like this, small, charged, and seemingly insignificant, were what passengers remembered long after they landed. In economy. Taylor Wynn sat with her phone in her hand, the signal bars flickering between strong and weak as the aircraft dipped toward the coast. She typed out a quick update. Descent into Eastport. Crew tension still visible. FAA and media confirmed at gate. Passenger calm. Expecting developments as soon as doors open. She hit send just before the plane banked slightly, revealing the glint of the Eastport Bay far below. At Apex headquarters, Miles Chen received his final set of instructions from the chairwoman's office upon arrival. Escort CEO to secure conference room. Begin review immediately. FAA will observe but not intervene until debrief. He relayed the message to the gate team with the precision of someone who had done this before, though never for the CEO himself. As the aircraft descended through a patch of light turbulence, a few passengers gripped their armrests. Dominic did not. His stillness was deliberate, a quiet signal to anyone paying attention that he was unshaken. He wanted the crew to see it. He wanted the passengers to see it. Leah stepped into the galley to stow a tray and found Samantha already there, standing rigidly with her back against the counter. "You ready for this?" Leah asked carefully. Samantha didn't look at her. "This isn't how I wanted the day to go." "That's not really the point anymore," Leah said, her voice low but steady. "The point is how it's handled now." Samantha's eyes narrowed, But she said nothing. In the cockpit, Alvarez radioed air traffic control for their final approach clearance. His voice was calm, but his mind was already on the arrival gate. The presence of FAA personnel and media meant there would be no quiet walk-off for anyone involved. Taylor glanced toward first class as the curtain shifted slightly with the cabin's movement. She caught a glimpse of Dominic, seated like a man who knew exactly what storm he was walking into. The image lodged in her mind, and she quickly opened her notes app to jot down a description before it faded. The shoreline of Eastport came into view, sunlight scattering across the water. The plane descended lower, the details of the city sharpening into focus highways looping like ribbons, clusters of buildings catching the afternoon light. Dominic's phone buzzed again with a secure notification. Arrival protocol active. Security escort confirmed. Press outside perimeter. He slipped the phone back into his pocket without acknowledging it further. The confirmation was unnecessary. He had expected nothing less. Leah moved through the cabin one last time, her voice even as she reminded passengers to power down devices for landing. When she reached Dominic, she hesitated for just a second, then said quietly, "Whatever happens when we land, there are people here who saw the whole thing." Dominic gave a small nod. "I know. That matters." The nose of the plane dipped slightly, the engines shifting pitch as the landing gear deployed with a muted thud. The runway stretched ahead, a strip of asphalt framed by the distant gleam of the terminal windows. In the control tower, ground staff received confirmation that the gate area had been cleared for security. FAA observers stood by, their presence a silent acknowledgement of the seriousness of the situation. The tires met the runway with a firm bump, the roar of reverse thrust filling the cabin. Passengers swayed forward and back, the familiar choreography of arrival. Taylor typed a final pre-landing update touchdown in Eastport. Secure teams visible on tarmac. Expect developments at gate. The aircraft slowed, taxiing toward Terminal B, outside. Dominic could see the cluster of vehicles near the gate security carts, a dark SUV with tinted windows, and a few camera lenses glinting in the sun. Samantha moved through the motions of post-landing checks, her eyes fixed on the task before her. Leah, on the other hand, kept her gaze open, scanning faces, reading the unspoken energy in the cabin. In the cockpit, Alvarez made the final turn toward the jet bridge. "Welcome to Eastport. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated until the seatbelt sign is switched off." His voice carried the same calm authority, but his eyes were on the line of security staff visible through the glass of the terminal. The plane eased into position, the engines winding down. The seatbelt sign remained lit. No one moved. Then came the chime, and with it, the moment everything in this flight had been building toward. The chime had barely faded when the aisle stirred with a quiet tension. Passengers reached for bags but moved slower than usual, sensing the air was charged with something more than the end of a flight. The cabin lights had that harsh, post-landing brightness, and the hum of the ventilation seemed louder in the silence. Dominic Hale stayed seated, hands resting loosely on the armrests. His posture was composed, his breathing steady. He had no intention of rushing toward the door. He knew that the moment his foot touched the jet bridge, the story would leave the confines of this aircraft and belong to the world outside. Captain Marcus Alvarez stood in the cockpit doorway now, an uncommon gesture for him during deboarding. His gaze swept the first-class cabin, making subtle assessments. He knew his crew would be watched as closely as the passenger at the center of this storm. Leah Ortiz began the process of releasing passengers row by row. She offered a polite thank you to each person, her voice calm, but her eyes occasionally darting toward the front where security shadows shifted in the glass of the terminal. Samantha Brooks remained near the galley, arms folded, lips pressed into a thin line. She did not look at Dominic, but the awareness of his presence was clear in her stillness. Edward Langston stood and reached for his bag, glancing briefly at Dominic. "Good luck with the circus," he muttered under his breath. Dominic's eyes stayed on him, his voice level. "Luck has nothing to do with it." As the first passenger stepped into the jet bridge, the noise from the terminal began to bleed in the murmur of voices, the faint click of camera shutters, the tinny echo of a gate agent's voice making unrelated announcements. But there was another sound beneath it. Low and deliberate, the firm footfalls of security staff moving into position. Taylor Wynn, seated in economy, had her phone angled discreetly toward the front of the cabin. She captured a short clip of the security team visible through the jet bridge window, their dark uniforms and earpieces marking them as more than just regular airport personnel. She hit send before her row began to move. When Leah reached Dominic's row, she paused. "Mr. Hale, you'll be escorted by our ground team," she said quietly, though her eyes told him she wished it were under different circumstances. "I understand," Dominic replied, rising smoothly. As he stepped into the aisle, passengers still waiting to exit instinctively shifted aside, creating a narrow path. Some watched openly, their expressions curious or sympathetic. Others pretended to fuss with bags, unwilling to meet his gaze. Samantha stepped back as he passed, her eyes fixed on a point beyond him. The jet bridge was a tunnel of cool air and controlled tension. 2 security officers flanked the entrance, falling into step behind Dominic without a word. Ahead, the glass walls of the terminal revealed the gathering at the gate uniformed staff, suited compliance officers, and beyond them, the unmistakable glint of camera lenses catching the light. Miles Chen stood at the edge of the secured area, tablet in hand. His expression was neutral, but his voice was clipped when he spoke into his earpiece. "CEO in transit. ETA 30 seconds. The passengers who had disembarked ahead of Dominic were already moving toward the main terminal, most unaware of the coordinated choreography happening just a few feet away. Those who lingered caught sight of the cameras and began whispering, their steps slowing as curiosity pulled them toward the spectacle. When Dominic emerged fully into the gate area, the noise swelled. Shutters clicked in rapid bursts. Someone called out his name. Another voice shouted a question about the incident. He didn't break stride. His eyes stayed forward, focused on the double glass doors that led to a restricted hallway. The security officers kept the path clear, their shoulders forming a shield against the encroaching crowd. Taylor slipped through the throng, her phone still recording. She caught a clear shot of Dominic walking with deliberate calm, the press of bodies around him like water breaking against a rock. She posted it instantly with a single line. "He walks through chaos like it's not even there." At the edge of the crowd, a man in a navy suit stepped forward. "Mr. Hale, I'm with FAA Oversight. We'll be present for your initial review." Dominic nodded once, but didn't slow. "Then you know where to find me." Miles pushed the restricted door open, holding it until Dominic stepped through. The noise of the gate area cut off abruptly, replaced by the muted hum of climate control and the low voices of waiting staff. Inside, a small conference room had been prepared. A carafe of water sat on the table beside a slim folder of documents. The blinds were drawn against the hallway. "Take a seat," Miles said quietly. "Chairwoman will join by secure line in 2 minutes." Dominic remained standing, looking out at the frosted glass. Let her know I'll speak when everyone who needs to hear this is in the room." "No sooner." Miles hesitated, then tapped his earpiece to relay the message. Outside the secured hallway, the gate remained a hive of activity. Samantha Brooks had been escorted through a separate route toward a staff holding room. Leah Ortiz was left to manage the remaining passengers and their questions. Taylor Wynn had already been approached by a local news crew asking for a live interview. In the conference room, the clock on the wall ticked toward the top of the hour. The FAA liaison entered quietly, taking a seat without comment. A compliance officer followed, placing a small recorder in the center of the table. Dominic finally sat, his hands folded on the table, his gaze steady. The air was still, except for the faint hum of the building systems. The door opened once more. A voice from the speakerphone filled the room. The chairwoman's, "Mr. Hale, the floor is yours." Dominic leaned forward slightly. This began as one decision made at a boarding gate, a decision that told a paying passenger that their place could be taken for someone else's comfort. That decision was made without cause, without protocol, and with an understanding that the person being moved would simply accept it. I did not accept it. The compliance officer scribbled notes as he spoke. "This is not about one seat," Dominic continued. "It's about what happens when we allow quiet acts of exclusion to go unchallenged. Today it was me. Tomorrow it could be a passenger without the platform to push back. We do not build trust by removing people from where they belong. We build it by defending their right to stay there." For a moment, the room was silent. Then the chairwoman's voice came again, crisp and certain. "Understood. We proceed from here." Dominic sat back, the faintest trace of steel in his eyes. The chaos at the gate had been just the beginning. The real reckoning was about to start. The hum of the air system in the small conference room was constant, but beneath it Dominic could sense the tension rising like steam. The FAA liaison sat at the far end of the table, hands folded, eyes on him. Miles Chen leaned against the wall, tablet in hand, ready to log every detail. The compliance officer's pen tapped lightly against the notepad, an unconscious rhythm of anticipation. The door opened, and Samantha Brooks stepped in. She avoided Dominic's eyes, her chin lifted in a way that suggested defiance, but her steps were measured, almost cautious. A uniformed HR representative followed, closing the door with a soft but definitive click. "Please take a seat, Ms. Brooks," the compliance officer said. She sat, folding her arms. "I've already given my account in writing." The officer nodded without looking up. "Now we'll go through it verbally, with Mr. Hale present." Dominic leaned back in his chair, his expression calm but attentive. He didn't speak, letting the silence stretch just long enough for Samantha to shift uncomfortably. The compliance officer began. "At the boarding gate, you approached Mr. Hale and informed him his assigned first-class seat was being reassigned to another passenger. Is that correct?" "Yes," Samantha replied. "It was a priority accommodation." "Was the other passenger a medical emergency?" "No." "A government official on urgent duty?" "No." "A paying passenger with higher status than Mr. Hale?" Samantha hesitated. "Not exactly, but they were considered a VIP by the airline." Dominic finally spoke, his voice steady. "You mean someone you were instructed to prioritize, regardless of ticket or status?" Her eyes flickered toward him, then away. "That's how we've been told to handle certain situations." The FAA liaison scribbled something in his notes. The compliance officer's voice remained even. "Did you follow standard reallocation protocol?" Samantha shifted in her seat. There's discretion given to senior crew members in cases like this. Dominic let a small pause hang in the air before saying, "Discretion without oversight becomes bias in uniform." Samantha's jaw tightened. "It wasn't personal." "That's the problem," Dominic said. "If it wasn't personal, then it was systemic. And systemic bias is far worse than one person's poor judgment." The HR representative interjected, "Let's focus on facts. Were you aware of Mr. Hale's identity when you reassigned his seat?" Samantha's answer came faster than expected. "Yes." The room went still. Even the quiet hum of the air system seemed louder. Dominic studied her. "So you knew who I was, and you still assumed there would be no consequence." Her lips pressed together. "I assumed you'd take it up later, not make a scene in front of passengers." "I didn't make a scene," Dominic replied. "I sat down where I was told and observed." The scene made itself when passengers recorded what they saw. Miles typed something on his tablet, the rapid taps breaking the silence. The compliance officer flipped a page in his notes. "Ms. Brooks, do you believe your actions reflected company values?" Her voice was quieter now. "I believe I acted within the flexibility I've been allowed. Whether that reflects the company's values, I don't know anymore." The FIA liaison looked up for the first time. "That answer will matter in my report." Samantha's eyes darted to him, and for the first time a hint of unease crossed her face. Dominic didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice. He simply leaned forward slightly, his tone measured. "This isn't about one flight attendant or one seat. It's about the message we send when authority is used without accountability. My presence on this flight made it visible, but if it had been someone without a voice or platform, it would have disappeared into the silence. That's not an airline I'm willing to lead." The chairwoman's voice came through the speakerphone, crisp and controlled. "Mr. Hale, proceed with your recommendation." Dominic didn't look away from Samantha. "Immediate removal from service for Ms. Brooks pending full review. A complete audit of discretionary authority in seating reassignments. Mandatory anti-bias training for all senior crew within 30 days. And this hearing is to be documented and shared with every department head." Samantha's face drained of color. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, as if realizing there was no argument left to make. The compliance officer noted the directives, his pen moving quickly. "Understood. Effective immediately." The HR representative stood. "Ms. Brooks, you'll come with me." She rose without looking at Dominic, the stiffness in her movements betraying the weight of the moment. The door closed behind her with a soft thud. For a few seconds, the room was silent, except for the faint ticking of the wall clock. Then the FAA liaison spoke again. "I'll be noting that your intervention prevented further escalation in the cabin, but I'll also be flagging this as a systemic vulnerability in crew discretion." Dominic nodded. "That's exactly what it is." Miles stepped forward from the wall. "Media is still outside the secure hallway. They've caught wind of the hearing. It's only a matter of time before they start pushing for details." Dominic's eyes sharpened. "Let them push. The truth will be public before they even have to ask." The chairwoman's voice returned. "Understood. We'll prepare the public statement. Mr. Hale, you'll approve the final wording before release." Dominic allowed himself a small exhale. The path forward was clear, but the weight of it still pressed on him. This wasn't just about repairing the optics of a bad day. It was about reshaping an entire culture, starting with the way authority was handed out and how it was used. As the meeting adjourned, Dominic stood and walked toward the door. Outside, the muffled buzz of the terminal was still present, But now, there was something else underneath it, the faint, growing awareness that this wasn't ending quietly. Taylor Wynn was still there, phone in hand, watching for his next move. Her followers had doubled since takeoff, and every update she posted was being shared across news feeds. When Dominic stepped into view, the camera lenses rose again, capturing the image of a man walking out of a closed-door reckoning without a single hint of retreat in his stride. He moved toward the exit, the secure corridor stretching ahead like a runway. The day had started with a single seat. Now it was about the entire direction of an airline. And as he walked, he knew one thing with absolute certainty: this was only the opening act. The secure hallway ended at a set of tinted glass doors. Beyond them, the world was already waiting. Dominic Hale could see the silhouettes of cameras, boom mics, and reporters pressed forward, their shapes distorted by the glass like waves against a breakwater. Miles Chen slowed his pace beside him. Once you step through, you'll be in full view. Security can hold them at a distance, but they won't block questions. Dominic's eyes stayed on the doors. Let them ask. The doors slid open, and sound rushed in the chaotic blend of camera shutters, shouted questions, and the murmur of curious travelers who had stopped to watch. Flashbulbs flared against the polished floor, capturing every step he took into the terminal. A reporter's voice cut through the noise. "Mr. Hale, why were you removed from your seat?" Another shouted over him, "Was this racial profiling? Are you pressing charges?" Dominic didn't flinch. His pace was steady, his gaze directed toward the line of microphones hastily set up near the security barrier. Security officers formed a soft perimeter, enough to give him a path but not enough to muffle the press's presence. Taylor Wynn was already there, positioned just beyond the front line. Her phone streamed live, the chat window scrolling so fast she could barely read it. When Dominic reached the microphones, she tilted her phone slightly, ensuring his face filled the frame. He stopped, letting the noise die just enough for his voice to carry. "I will answer 3 questions," he said. "After that, I have work to do." The crowd quieted in the way only urgency can command. A woman from Channel 8 News spoke first. "Was your removal from first class a mistake or a targeted action?" Dominic's eyes were steady. It was a decision made without protocol and without cause. Whether it was targeted or systemic is exactly what we're about to find out. A man from a national network leaned forward. "Do you believe your race played a role in that decision?" Dominic's pause was deliberate, the kind that forces attention to the next words. "I believe assumptions were made about me that would not have been made about others. I believe those assumptions reflect deeper issues in how authority is exercised in this industry." The final question came from Taylor, her voice cutting cleanly through the noise. "What happens now?" Dominic didn't hesitate. "Now. The culture changes, or the people who refuse to change will leave." The murmur rose again, reporters calling for follow-ups. But Dominic stepped back from the microphones. He gave no more. Miles guided him toward a side exit, where a black SUV waited. As they moved, passengers still lingering in the terminal turned their phones toward him, some whispering, others calling out words of support. Once inside the SUV, the noise of the terminal fell away. Dominic sat back, loosening his tie just enough to breathe. Miles glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "That last line's going to be everywhere in an hour." "It's supposed to be," Dominic said. On the drive from Eastport International to the downtown headquarters, the first clips of the press exchange were already flooding social media. Taylor's live stream had hit over 2 million views within 40 minutes. The hashtag #RighteousSeatForSale was trending, alongside Dutch Apex CEO and systemic bias. In her own rideshare, Taylor refreshed her feed, watching the engagement climb. Her DMs were full of interview requests and offers to license her footage. She ignored most of them. This wasn't just about clicks. This was about the story hitting where it mattered. At Apex headquarters, the PR team was already drafting statements. Screens in the crisis room displayed real-time sentiment analysis, showing a spike in negative mentions, but also a rapid rise in supportive commentary from customers and advocacy groups. Dominic arrived through the underground garage, bypassing the lobby entirely. In the elevator, he closed his eyes for a brief moment, letting the hum of the machinery settle his thoughts. He had walked through chaos at the gate, faced the press without flinching, and now the real work would begin. The work that would decide if this moment was remembered as a headline or a turning point. Upstairs, the executive conference room was lit brightly, despite the late afternoon. The chairwoman was already on a large video screen, flanked by legal counsel and 2 other board members. "You've set the tone publicly," she said. "Now we need to align internally." Dominic took his seat at the head of the table. Alignment starts with truth. Every internal report from today will be released to employees before it's sent to the press. No spin, no omissions. A murmur passed through the executives in the room. One of them, a VP of operations, frowned. "That's not our usual process." Dominic met his eyes. "That's why we're here." As the meeting progressed, updates came in from the FAA, confirming their cooperation in reviewing discretionary seating authority across all Apex flights. Civil rights organizations had already issued statements calling for broader industry audits. The conversation had moved beyond one flight, beyond one airline, in another part of the city. Samantha Brooks sat in a quiet HR office, waiting for the formal notice of her suspension. Her phone buzzed constantly, messages from colleagues, friends, and strangers alike. Some offered sympathy, others didn't. She had avoided looking at the news, but fragments of the press conference had reached her anyway. Each word Dominic had spoken felt like a nail sealing a door she could no longer open. Back at headquarters, the chairwoman wrapped the call. "We'll reconvene at 800 tomorrow. Until then, manage the narrative and prepare for resistance." Dominic stood, gathering his notes. Resistance is expected, but so is change. Outside, the city lights had begun to glow against the darkening sky. The press vans were still parked near the terminal, their satellite dishes pointed upward, sending the day's footage to every corner of the country. Taylor, now at a small cafe with her laptop, uploaded a longer cut of her footage, pairing it with commentary about systemic bias in customer service industries. Within minutes, advocacy accounts began sharing it, linking the Apex incident to broader stories of quiet, everyday exclusion. Dominic returned to his apartment just before 10. He poured a glass of water and stood by the window, looking out at the city. The hum of traffic below was constant, the same as it had been yesterday, but he knew the air inside the industry had shifted. The decision to remove him from that seat had set off a chain reaction, one he intended to see through to its end. His phone buzzed again, this time with a secure message from the chairwoman board support holding. Public sentiment trending favorable. Stay visible. He typed a simple reply. Always. Then he set the phone down and let the quiet settle in. Tomorrow, the storm would still be raging. But tonight, for a few hours, he allowed himself the stillness of knowing he had not moved and that the world had noticed. The city was still waking when Dominic Hale stepped into the glass-walled conference room on the 24th floor. The early sunlight reflected off the surrounding towers, throwing shards of gold across the long polished table. A carafe of coffee steamed in the corner, untouched. Miles Chen was already there, scrolling through a live feed of social sentiment on his tablet. "We're still trending," he said, without looking up. "Hashtags haven't slowed since last night." Dominic removed his coat and set it neatly over the back of his chair. "Good. It means people are still watching. That's leverage." The chairwoman's face appeared on the wall screen moments later, followed by several senior executives dialing in from remote offices. The agenda for this meeting was blunt. The audit Dominic had called for yesterday would begin today. The VP of Operations, Carl Stanton, wasted no time. "Before we start tearing into this, I want to be clear. These audits can't paralyze our crews. If word gets out that every discretionary decision is under review, we risk hesitation in real emergencies." Dominic leaned forward, his tone steady. "We're not paralyzing them. We're holding them accountable. If a crew member hesitates because they know someone will check their decision, maybe it's a decision worth checking." Carl frowned. "It's not that simple in the field." "It's exactly that simple when the field is a cabin and the passenger is a human being," Dominic replied. The compliance officer, seated at the far end, adjusted his glasses. "We've already identified gaps in training. Discretion has become a catch-all excuse for bending rules. In some cases, it's been used to mask bias, intentional or not." The chairwoman nodded. "Which is why this process will be public. Internal transparency first, external if necessary." There was a murmur among the executives. Public audits were rare, and no one wanted to see internal failures laid bare for customers and shareholders. Miles tapped his tablet. "I've set up a secure reporting portal for employees. Anonymous submissions. We'll start seeing patterns within a week." Dominic looked around the table. "This isn't about one incident. It's about a culture that allowed the incident to happen without a second thought. That ends now." The silence that followed was heavy, the kind that revealed more than words could. Some in the room were with him. Others were calculating the political cost of siding against him. By mid-morning, the internal memo announcing the audit had gone out. Within an hour, Dominic's inbox filled with a mix of cautious support and outright hostility. One message from a veteran pilot read, "Appreciate what you're doing, but you're going to make enemies fast." Another, from a senior flight supervisor, was less polite. "You don't understand what it's like out there. You're going to get people fired who are just doing their jobs." Dominic read each one, filed them mentally into patterns. He'd faced resistance before, but this was different. This was about loyalty to the truth or to the way things had always been. At noon, he met with Leah Ortiz in a quiet break room near the crew lounge. She looked nervous, glancing at the closed door. "I got your message," Dominic said, sitting across from her. Leah folded her hands. I wanted to say thank you. Not everyone in that cabin would have spoken up if they were in your position. Some of us have seen things. We didn't know who to tell. You do now," Dominic said. "The portal's anonymous. Use it." Leah hesitated. "It's not just bias. It's pressure from above. Sometimes it's about who knows who. Sometimes it's about making someone's day at the expense of someone else's dignity." Dominic nodded slowly. "Then we'll document all of it, and we'll show it to the people who think this is about one bad choice." Before she left, Leah paused at the door. "You're going to get pushback, the kind that doesn't happen in meetings." Dominic gave her a small, steady smile. "I'm counting on it." The first true test came later that afternoon. Carl Stanton walked into Dominic's office unannounced. closing the door behind him. "I've just had 3 department heads call me, furious about your audit memo," Carl said. "They're worried you're turning this into a witch hunt." Dominic kept his gaze level. "A witch hunt is when you target people without evidence. This is the opposite. We're gathering evidence so no one can hide behind procedure." Carl stepped closer. "You've been here long enough to know the board hates instability. You keep this up, you're going to find yourself isolated." Dominic stood, not to intimidate, but to meet Carl eye to eye. "If isolation is the price for doing the right thing, then I've paid worse prices before." Carl studied him for a long moment before turning toward the door. "You won't see it coming when it happens." When the door shut, Miles stepped in from the adjoining office. "That went well," he said dryly. Dominic exhaled slowly. Better they show their cards early. By evening, the news cycle had shifted again. Taylor Wynn had published a detailed thread linking the Apex incident to other passenger testimonies she'd uncovered. Several stories went viral, each describing small acts of quiet exclusion that rarely made headlines but chipped away at trust in the industry. In her final post of the day, Taylor wrote, "One CEO decided not to let it slide. Now we'll see who else stands up." Dominic read it from his desk, the city lights stretching out beneath the floor-to-ceiling windows. Outside, the storm was building again. Inside, the real battle had begun not against the press, but against the people who had the most to lose if change actually happened. Tomorrow, the pushback would get louder, and Dominic intended to be louder still. Morning light poured through the windows of a parked Apex 787 at Eastport, washing the cabin in a soft silver glow. The jet bridge was attached, the doors propped, the aisle empty for now. Dominic Hale chose this place on purpose. Not a ballroom, not a podium with drapes. Here, inside the space where the harm began. Here, where the remedy would be spoken. He stood by seat 2A with his jacket off and sleeves rolled once, the leather still warm from sunlight. He placed his palm on the headrest for a moment, then let it fall. His face was composed, but his breath carried the weight of a sleepless night. Miles Chen climbed the jet bridge with a tablet under his arm. He stopped beside Dominic and opened a folder of preliminary findings. No theatrics, just numbers and patterns that spoke for themselves. Discretionary receipts without documented cause. Disparities in who was asked to move. Complaints filed that went nowhere. The graphs were not dramatic. They were steady in a way that chilled more than any spike could. "It is not one person," Miles said quietly. "It is a practice that became a habit." Dominic nodded. "We will break the habit." Voices echoed up the bridge. The cabin began to fill. Crew representatives, station managers, reporters with muted voices and bright lenses. The chairwoman on a screen mounted near the galley. Captain Marcus Alvarez took a jump seat facing the aisle, his uniform perfect and his eyes clear. Leia Ortiz stood in the forward galley, hands folded, steady as a shoreline. Near the last row of first class, a woman in a dark blazer stepped in with a simple badge. Amelia Grant, the FAA liaison, had come in person. Taylor Wynn found a spot against the bulkhead and lifted her phone. She spoke softly to the stream. "We are inside the aircraft. Seat 2A is here behind me. No stage, no distance. This is where the statement will be made." Beat. Dominic stepped into the aisle. The cabin hushed. He did not need a microphone. The 787 carried voices with a gentle echo that felt like the inside of a chapel. "I called this meeting on the aircraft because this aircraft belongs to the public trust," he said. "We fly people to work and to weddings and to funerals. We fly people to new lives and back to old ones. The only way to answer what happened is to stand inside the place where it happened. He nodded to Miles. The screen above the galley lit with simple slides. No names of passengers. No faces. Only patterns. A quiet cascade of proof. First, Dominic said, we acknowledge the harm. A paying passenger was removed from a seat without cause. That passenger was me. But today is not about me. Today is about everyone who sat where they were told and trusted us to see them as equal in dignity. Second, we acknowledge what the data shows. When discretion is unconstrained, bias will borrow its uniform. We did not set enough guardrails. We will set them now. He paused, letting the sentence land. The cabin was so quiet that the faint click of a camera felt like a cough. Effective today, discretionary seat reassignments are suspended unless a documented operational reason is entered and co-signed by the captain. Every reassignment will be reviewed within 24 hours by compliance and by an internal civil rights team. We will publish quarterly numbers to our employees and to the public. He looked down the aisle to Captain Alvarez. The captain gave a single, solemn nod. We are creating an independent body called the Beacon Council, Dominic continued. Its members will include external civil rights advocates, passenger representatives, and a seat reserved for an FAA observer. Ms. Grant has agreed to serve in that role. The Beacon Council will audit dignity and equity across our network and publish its findings without interference. Amelia Grant inclined her head. The FAA will monitor for follow-through, she said. If these promises become paper, you will see us again in a different posture. We will give them steel, Dominic said, not paper. He turned to Leah. Miss Ortiz, you spoke up when it was not easy. You will join our new training council to rebuild how we teach power and service. Your voice will be in the room where scripts are written. Leah swallowed and nodded once, eyes bright but steady. He turned to Miles. Mr. Chen, you built the systems that made truth visible. You are now Director of Integrity Systems with authority across operations, data, and reporting. Your charge is simple. Make it impossible to hide a pattern. A few quiet breaths moved through the cabin. Taylor lowered her phone a fraction and blinked hard, then lifted it again. A hand rose from row 3. Carl Stanton stood, suit sharp, expression sharper. With respect, Carl said, this is a noble speech, but you are about to choke the crew with fear. In the real world, decisions must be made fast. You will freeze service. You will make enemies of your best people. Dominic did not move. He kept his voice low enough that everyone leaned in. In the real world, we decide what real means. We can say real means speed at any cost. Or we can say real means speed with guardrails. We can say real means excellence without dignity. Or we can say excellence is made of dignity. Carl's jaw flexed. And when our top performers leave because they feel targeted, then they were never our top performers, Dominic said quietly. Our top performers are the ones who can carry skill and respect in the same hand. Amelia spoke without looking at Carl. The FAA has seen airlines hide behind a myth that safety or service cannot live with equity. That myth ends today. Captain Alvarez unbuckled his jump seat and stood. I was the captain on that flight. I made a choice to intervene. I would make it again. These reforms do not slow the airplane. They steady it. For a long second, the cabin held its breath. Then the chairwoman spoke from the screen. The board supports these measures. If anyone cannot, our Human Resources Department will accept resignations before close of business. Carl sat down slowly, eyes fixed on the armrest. The message was understood. Beat Dominic took one last breath and faced the cameras. To our customers, he said, we are sorry. We failed a standard we claim to live by. We are not asking for trust back today. We are asking for the chance to earn it with work you can see. He stepped aside. Questions came like rain. He chose 3. Taylor asked the first. How will you know this is not just a speech? Because the numbers will be public, Dominic said, and because the council that checks us will not report to me. A reporter near the aisle asked the second. Will there be discipline beyond the suspension? We already know about, yes, Dominic said. Discipline will follow evidence, but the larger discipline is culture. This is not about one name. It is about how we assign worth. A young journalist asked the third, why hold this inside a cabin when you could do it on a stage? Because a stage is for distance. Dominic said, a cabin is for travel. This company is not traveling away from this. We are traveling through it. He closed the briefing with a simple line. A seat can be purchased. Respect must be protected. Beat. The crowd thinned. Crew drifted into quiet conversations. Reporters filed down the jet bridge with their gear. Leah stayed a moment longer, running her fingers over the back of 2A as if feeling a pulse. A small boy and his father entered with a station escort, part of a community program that toured airplanes between flights. The boy stopped at 2A and looked up at the pledge placard that Miles had placed in the headrest sleeve. It read in plain type that every passenger would be treated with dignity equal to their ticket and equal to their neighbor. The boy traced the first line with his finger, then glanced at Dominic. Is this your seat? He asked. It was for a while, Dominic said with a smile. Today it belongs to anyone who has a ticket for it. The boy nodded in the serious way children do when the world makes sense. His father touched his shoulder and they moved on, counting windows and whispering about the cockpit. Dominic watched them go, then turned back to the aisle and let the cabin settle around him. The plane was quiet again, not empty, not finished, just ready for the next boarding call. Outside, the day moved forward. Inside, the sky felt a little wider. The plane is quiet now. Seat 2A faces forward, the leather warm again beneath the light. A boy reads a promise on a headrest card. A captain straightens his wings. A junior attendant finds her voice. A data analyst turns numbers into truth. And a CEO chooses the harder road, so the next passenger will not have to. Beat. What happened on flight AG4 Sahavnian was not a scene to scroll past. It was the map of how bias hides in routines, how dignity can be set aside with a single nod, and how courage, even when soft, can change the course of a company. Suspension matters. Audits matter. Councils and public numbers matter. But what matters most is the new reflex we choose to build. See the person. Defend the seat. Protect the respect. Every time. Discrimination is not a misunderstanding. It is a cut. It is a cost. It is a choice. We name it, we confront it, and we do the work so that the cabin belongs to everyone who enters. Inko, if this story moved you, if it sharpened the line between comfort and courage, stay with us. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs a small push towards speaking up. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. More voices are coming. More flights to set right. Until the promise on every headrest is true.